Right, I'm going to tilt this a little bit. I'm going to get straight on talking about the plants because we've got so much to get through today. I've got so many exciting plants to introduce you to. So we'll get started. What we're going to do is move around the farm and we'll look at a few different plants in different places. So this little border here, although this is in my garden, I've brought a lot of wild plants home just from seeds and I just let them kind of take over. So what we're going to meet first, the plant we're going to meet first is, if you can see, there. Can you see the one with the white petals and the yellow middle? I'll pick some up. This plant here, this is feverfew. Can you see the leaves? And they've got this like almost like a daisy type of petal, type of flower. So feverfew is a really interesting plant. It gets its name from the fact that it has traditionally, since ancient Greek times, been used for remedying pain and fever. It likes to grow at edges. It's an edge plant, so you can find it just in kind of near walls, near allotments, and it's got very kind of a mid-green leaf, and it's got this white petaled flower with a yellow middle. Now feverfew is a really interesting plant because the reason it's been used for so long is because it's got an amazing chemical in it. It's been known to relieve migraines for a long time, and how it does that, it contains a chemical called parthenolide. Parthenolide actually comes from ancient Greek times. If anybody's heard of the temple Parthenon, apparently when that was being built, over the hundreds of years of it being built, when people were injured building it, they would use this plant to remedy them, which is why the chemical in this plant got its name parthenolide. And how it works, it's been proven to reduce migraines. And how it works, it's a cumulative effect. So it's not the kind of thing that you can take when you've got a headache. A lot of people say, oh, I've tried feverfew and it doesn't work for my migraines, because they've just tried to take it like you would take a painkiller. How this works is it's cumulative build-up over about 3 weeks. And how it works is it blocks the prostaglandins, which are the things that kind of help the blood vessels dilate. So it restricts the excessive blood flow to the brain and reduces the migraine like that. So in addition to long being used as medicine, we can actually eat it. We can eat all parts of it, so the flowers and the leaves. I've grouped these plants here, the two that we're going to look at, Herb Robert and feverfew, because of their unique tastes really in wild plants. Often in wild plants you have kind of bitter, you've got a bit of lemon, kind of tart flavour, you've got bland. But these two plants that we're looking at here have really got tastes of their own. Feverfew is extremely strong. So if you were going to use this in cooking, you would only need a tiny little bit as a flavouring. So you could add a few leaves into a pot as a kind of pot herb. If you tried it and just put a little bit in your mouth now, its taste is so potent that most people would spit it out. It's very, very bitter. In fact, when I've tried to make medicines with it in the past, I've needed half a jar of honey to get it palatable. So you only need a tiny little bit of this plant to add a bit of flavour to a savoury meal. So it's kind of more like a herb. So feverfew is good for migraines, and it's good as a pot herb. And the little flowers, you can also you can use those. You can eat those. The other thing you could do with it is, in the past they've put it as a green layer between bread, so as sandwiches, like for sandwiches, because if you eat too much of this, it can actually cause ulcers in your mouth, on your mucous membranes. So traditionally, if they were using it for headaches, they would put it between 2 slices of bread so that it doesn't burn your kind of gastrointestinal tract. So just a little bit in cooking is a very strong flavouring. Okay, so that's feverfew. And the other plant with quite an unusual, unique taste, so I'll put that down there. If you see growing next to it, if you see the flowers, so Herb Robert, Herb Robert is named after a monk from 1000 AD in France. He was a herbalist, and he used to treat all of the people in his village with this plant for just about everything. So Herb Robert, we can eat all parts of it, so the leaves, the petals and the seed heads. Sometimes is also known as storkbill or cranesbill, and if you can see the seed heads, you can just see why, because they're kind of shaped like a bird's head. You see the seed with a beak. So you might have heard of this as stork's bill, crane's bill, but I know it as herb robert after the monk. Now, the taste of this, like we said about feverfew as being really, really kind of strong and very bitter. This is, I liken it to coriander. So if you like coriander but you're looking for a native version of it, you can use the leaves. If you look at the leaves, you can use those raw in salads. Or I also like to dry them and make a tea. Again, this is a plant of the edge. It grows edges of allotments, edges of woodland. So you can just pick the leaves and eat them raw as a wayside nibble or in a salad. But I also like to dry them and make a tea. Now, some of the reasons it's worth eating herb robert, other than the fact that it's actually kind of a bit like coriander, so it's got quite an unusual taste for a wild plant in our country. It has amazing health benefits, and obviously Monk Robert knew this. So it has been shown, because it's a member of the geranium family, and it contains a chemical called geraniin. And geraniin has been found to be a wonder chemical. It's been proven, or it had been proven, to reduce the growth of cancer, because it causes the cells in the body to uptake more oxygen. So it had been thought to reduce tumour size in breast and brain tumours. The other thing in Japan is there's actually a medicine that's registered using geraniin for diarrhea, but there's many other uses of it as well. But personally, I just think it's really nice as a food. So yeah, so herb robert just in salads or as a handful added to kind of a stir-fry green mixture to give a bit of a coriander taste. So I'll just show you again in situ. The next plant I'm going to introduce you to has a really interesting story. So if you're ready, this plant here is one that I brought back from the woods. This here is, can you see the pink flowers? And the pink flowers have a kind of, they've got a kind of bulb, like a bladder behind them. This is red campion. If you look at the leaves, this one isn't in too good a state because I thought I was losing the farm, so I didn't split it this year, and it's got a bit too chunky for its own good. But if you look at the leaves, and then these kind of very kind of bright pink flowers with a kind of bladder on the back. So red campion, you might hear a lot of people saying that you can't eat campion because it's too rich in saponin. However, there's a bit more to saponin than that. There it is. So this is red campion. You can find it at the edge of woodlands, so kind of little woodland glade walks. It quite likes shady areas. Now, the thing about the saponins in it, when you see you can't eat red campion, you need to understand saponins a little bit more. Yes, this plant is saponin rich. However, we can eat it because our bodies don't absorb saponin very much at all, and especially if we cook the plant. So as long as you cook the leaves or the flowers of this plant to kind of to reduce the saponin, then you can eat it. But best of all, there's a fantastic story about how native cultures use this plant to catch a different type of wild food. Red campion roots are where most of the saponin lies. Now, there are some cultures, and we can emulate this here, that dig up the roots and they mix it with water. They mix them with water, and they make a big kind of solution of this saponin-rich water, and they take it fishing to catch fish. So yes, you can eat this plant, despite what people say about the saponins, but also you can use it to catch fish. And how you would do that is you would find some carrion, dead carrion, or a rabbit, a dead rabbit, and you would hang it above a meander on a bend, so somewhere shady and cool. And you hang your dead animal over the bend, and after a day or two, it gets maggots in it, and the maggots drop into the water, and they pre-bait that area of the river. So then our ancestors would come along with their bucket of saponin-rich red campion root water, and they would pour that into the water. And because fish can't tolerate saponins, they die instantly, and they float to the surface. And then the people would get the fish, just scoop it out of the water, and by cooking it, of course, it gets rid of the saponins, so they were able to eat the fish. So red campion is edible as long as you heat the saponins out, but equally you can use the roots to make a liquid to pour into water and to kill fish. Now, the other interesting thing about this plant is its Latin name is Silene dioica. Now dioica in Latin means two houses, and we're going to meet nettle in a minute, which is Urtica dioica. And what dioica means is of two houses. It means that the male and the female parts of the plant are on separate flowers. So we'll meet, so that's its Latin name, Silene dioica. But we know it as red campion, and you can find it on kind of woodland edges everywhere. So contrary to popular belief, you can actually eat that as long as you cook it well. So I'm going to try and take us back to the chickweed that we walked past to get here, okay? So if you bear with me, because chickweed is a really, really interesting plant, very useful. So you're still with me, I can see. Let's have a look. Right, I think we might have it. The reception gods are with us for a change. Right, so this plant here, growing in the drive, which is a perfect example of how resilient chickweed is. You can find it in towns and cities everywhere, just in paths. You can find it in the countryside, in farmers' fields. Now, chickweed's Latin name is Stellaria media, and if I show you why, that means little star in the midst. And if I show you it, you might be able to see, if I pull some off, there's a tiny little white flower in the middle of all of the green. So in French we call it Stella moyenne, so a little star in the middle, and in Latin it's Stellaria media, and that's one of the ways to tell it has these tiny, tiny little white flowers amongst a sea of green. So chickweed, as its name suggests, chicks actually love this. They go mad for it, chickens. Now there is another plant called mouse ear. If you look at the leaves on this, you can see why. It's kind of got a tiny little, it's almost like a mouse ear. So another plant very similar to this called mouse ear isn't so good on the tummy. So how to tell the difference between chickweed and mouse ear is chickweed has a tiny little spine of hair. If you hold it against something dark, then you can see the line. It's almost like a backbone of fine hair, and that's how you tell the difference. If it's been raining, that line of hair will disappear in the rain, so just kind of, like if I go like that, it'll just smooth it down, you can't see the line of hair. So chickweed, to distinguish it from mouse ear, just look for that spine of hair down the stem. So chickweed is edible raw as a salad, or a fantastic recipe for it is to chop it up really thinly, a couple of handfuls per person, chop it up really thinly and then make a batter. So to make a batter, it's just a bowl of flour, crack an egg into it, whisk in some water and some milk, and then add your spices for this. It's going to be chickweed pakora, and then you throw your handfuls of chickweed in, mix it all up and just fry dollops in the frying pan. So chickweed pakora is one use of it, or just raw in salads. A warning with this is that if you ever see this growing in farmers' fields, it might look really big and healthy, and you think, oh, that looks great. However, often in farmers' fields, what's happened is chickweed loves nitrates. It really thrives on the nitrates that the farmers put on the field. So if you are getting some from an agricultural area, just make sure that you don't eat as much and that you cook it well, because otherwise you'll be ingesting those nitrates. So that's one caveat. So the benefits of chickweed, most of the wild plants, I mean, I could say, oh, this plant has this particular mineral or that particular nutrient. However, the fact is, all wild plants are so much healthier for you than the supermarket veg. They pretty much all contain vitamin C, vitamin A, magnesium, potassium, iron, because that's what's in the soil that they're living on. And the other thing to think about as well is when people make nutritional claims about wild food, it totally depends on the soil that they've grown in. So, you know, to say that a plant has X amount of magnesium, it really depends where it's grown. Also, the other thing to do with when you're eating wild plants is the nutrition, but also the taste can vary depending on where they're grown. So some people might report something tastes in one way, and then other people something different. And again, that can be where it's grown and the weather that it's been subject to, the habitat, the climate. So chickweed is quite a bland tasting one on the whole, so it's very easy to use in lots of different things. So we've said about salads, you can cook it as a spring green, have it as pakora. But the other interesting thing is you can make ointments with chickweed. Years ago, my daughter got eczema on her back and took her to the doctors, and they gave her steroid cream. So as soon as I saw it was steroid cream, I binned it and I made some chickweed ointment, because chickweed is really good for eczema topically. So that's another benefit of it. So I'm pleased that we've still got you with reception, so we'll go back up to the teepee site. So that's chickweed, found everywhere. Be careful if you're eating it in farmers' fields, just make sure you cook it well. Stellaria media. Right, let's see if we can keep reception as we move. Thank you for bearing with me, they've really got us out on a limb here. Right, so the next few plants we're going to look at are in the shade, under the lime tree. So we'll look at a couple of pricklies. We've got thistle, nettle, next to each other here, as often they are. Now thistle, yes, we've got good Wi-Fi. You can see this huge thistle that I've been growing specially for you. The word thistle, you might be very surprised to know this is edible for humans. The word thistle, it comes from Old English thistle, which means to prick. And you might be very surprised that you can actually eat thistle, all parts of it. And it's a really good one because, of course, livestock can't eat thistle, because we can simply cut the spiky bits off, which livestock can't. So you can always be guaranteed to find thistles. Now, there are actually over 14 different types of thistle in our country, but they don't all belong to the same family. Some of them are daisy members, so if that's the case and you're allergic to daisies, because some people have allergies to daisies and dandelions, you might need to be careful if you were processing thistles. So, of those 14 different types, they're all edible, but you might not want to process some of them because they're more spike than leaf, than edible part. However, if you find one like this is what you call a spear thistle. It's one of the larger ones that you see in our country. Can you see? This one is more leaf than spike, which means there's quite a lot of food there as long as you've got a pair of scissors. So for eating the leaves, all you need to do is take some scissors and just literally cut the spikes off, and then that central vein in the middle here, this is far too tough and bitter to eat, so you just cut the vein out, and then the resulting green without spikes on, you simply cook it like cabbage. As the plant gets older, the leaves get tougher, but the good news is you can eat so many more parts of that, so even when the leaves are past, you can eat the roots. I've prepared some for you earlier here. Thistle roots, like all plants that have got tap roots, I always liken them to lizards. If you kind of try to pull up a plant with a tap root, it always leaves a tap root behind, and it's almost like that's its plan to survive so that it'll grow again. However, you've still got all of these roots here. So thistle root is edible, and it's actually really delicious, and you can prepare it in a number of ways. You can eat it raw. If you look, it's got this kind of casing on, but if you strip that casing off, can you see? There's the casing and there's the inner root. This is the nicest bit. That's like kind of carrot skin or potato skin. This bit here is a bit tougher, but how you can prepare them, you can chop them up and stir fry them with soy sauce, or you can just put lots in the oven and roast them. But the outer is delicious, just raw. And this is a bit tougher, so you'd want to cook that bit. So you've got thistle root, and then you've got the leaves, which we already talked about. But what my boys used to do is, you've got all this tall stem here, so you don't need to waste that either, because we used to go out for walks and my boys, they both had penknives, and what they used to do is you pick a thistle at the bottom where it's got less prickles, so you just pick it, pull it out the ground, and then with your knife you simply cut all the leaves off like that, and the outer stem, because the outer stem, when it's a little bit older, can be tough, but when it's young and fresh, they used to just eat the whole stem. They used to just eat it as we were walking along, but then they soon learned that you could take it home and dip it in bowls of white sugar like they did with rhubarb sticks. So this stem here, this is edible. This one's a little bit tough because it's grown up, you can see it's been there a while. But even when the outer is tough, if you use your thumb or a knife and split the stem, the inside is absolutely delicious and sweet. Now, the thing about prickly plants and stingy plants like thistles and nettles, because they've evolved to have the protection mechanisms of stings and prickles, it means they can be quite bland in taste. They don't need a strong bitter taste to put off predators. So you often find that things that have got stings and thistles, they are quite bland and palatable. In fact, often people say that you can use things like nettles as you would spinach, which is of course a bland vegetable. So you just split that open, and if you look inside the stalk of the thistle is all this kind of white fibre. You have to remember as well with wild food, it's very difficult to find carbohydrates, and inside stems is a really good place to find carbohydrates. And this is delicious. It's actually quite sweet. It's quite sweet. And it's a good source of kind of wayside carbohydrate if you're lacking in a little bit of energy. There are other plants as well that you can do this with, and we're going to meet willow herb further up. So you've got the inside there, you've got the stem itself. When it's not quite so hard and woody as this, what you can do with it then is you simply, so if this was all soft, you just cut it into inch-long bits, and then you stir-fry these, or you can put them in salads. So you just cut the stem into inch-long bits, and I've done a limpet and thistle stem stir fry, and it was absolutely delicious because the thistle stems, which are quite bland but fresh and crispy, they kind of absorbed all the seafood taste. So we've got the roots you can eat, the stems and the leaves you can eat like cabbage. So the other thing to say about thistle is that at the very top, we've got one on here, not yet. At the very top, they get the kind of classic purple flower, you know, like the Scottish symbol. So these will become purple flowers. So you might have seen those. Inside the purple flower head, there is lots of seeds, and you can even eat the seeds of thistle, so that you can eat all of it. Now the other thing you can do with any wild edible seeds is you can sprout them. You can put them on a saucer with a wet piece of kitchen roll, put the seeds on and just let them sprout, and then add them to stir fry. So you can do that with thistle seeds as well. A really nice thing to do with the purple flowers is, if you've got Scots friends visiting, you could make shortbread, and then you can actually pull off the petals or put the flower heads in whole, so you've got a kind of really a pretty looking shortbread. So you can use all parts of the thistle. So next to prickles, we've got stings. Don't know if you can see this here, hang on. Nettle. Now, I'm including nettle. I know most of you probably already know that you can eat nettle, but there's actually so many fascinating facts about nettle that I want to get across. So we've actually been eating nettles for about 8,000 years. It's our traditional English food. The Latin name for nettle is Urtica dioica. Urtica comes from the Latin uri, which means to burn, which is the sting. And dioica, as we've already said, means two houses. So you might notice that there's different kinds of nettles. There's male and female, and the male flowers are different from the female flowers. So basically dioica comes from the idea that the male and female parts are in different flowers. There's 3 types of nettle in our country. This is the common nettle, but there's also, you know, the little vicious stingy one, really, really little. That's the dwarf nettle. And then there's another one, Roman nettle, that you don't really see much of. The only thing you can really get nettle mixed up with that isn't nettle is the white dead nettle, which isn't actually a nettle, but you can eat that anyway, so that doesn't matter, and the red dead nettle. They're both a lot smaller, and they both look like nettles but aren't, but they're still edible, so there's no, it's a really good one to start with. Now, you can eat all parts of nettle. It's a sign of human habitation, by the way. You know where to find nettles, but did you know that it's a sign of human habitation in that they only grow in places where there's been lots of human waste or animal waste, where humans have congregated animals together in large numbers. Tristan Gooley in his book says that if you're out in the wild, in pure wilderness, you will not find nettles, and that if you're walking and you're lost and you come to some nettles, it's a sign that you're coming near to civilization. So they like to grow in fertile soil. So with that in mind, what can we eat of the nettle? We can eat all parts of the nettle. We'll start with the root. The roots of nettle can be used pretty much in the same way as other edible wild roots. So you can stir fry them, you can roast them. But what I really want to communicate about nettle root is it's proven to help prostate cancer and prostate health. And how it does that is there's such a thing in them called lignans, and lignans help the hormone get across the barrier in the prostate to actually do their job where they're meant to be. So lignans have been proven to help people with prostate cancer, or just improve the overall health of it. So you can eat the roots, but it's also good as medicine. The plant as a whole tends to be detoxifying in that it kind of works on the kidneys to help excrete toxins. The leaves, when I say we've been eating them for 8,000 years, our ancestors would have eaten their nettles. They would have found whatever local grain there was, and they would have had some animal fat and nettles and combined them and had kind of nettle cakes. Now, we can do it with any grain really. So Scottish people would have done it with oats, and I've actually done it with polenta. So you just kind of wilt some nettles in a pan, mix it with polenta and a little bit of onion, and then fry them as nettle cakes. So that was a traditional way of using nettles. More modern, kind of up-to-date ways, you can use nettles wherever you would use spinach. So, for example, if you're making a sagaloo or something, you could have sweet potato and chickpea with nettle. So, kind of any of the modern dishes that would have spinach in, you can use nettle. But also, a popular thing now is to dry them. I always tended to have a jar of dried nettles in the house, and I would just crumble them into anything. So crumble a handful of nettles into omelette, a handful into pasta. But equally, you can powder the dried nettles. So you just make a green powder, and then you can add that powder to anything else, such as baking. Even people are making green cakes now with powdered nettle, or you can add it to smoothies like a superfood. So there's kind of modern ways and traditional ways of using nettle. I'm sure most of you have probably tried making nettle soup at some point. That's a classic starting point for foragers. To make a nettle soup, all you do is 1 potato, 1 onion, chop them up, fry them a little bit, add a carrier bag of nettles, put the lid on so the nettles wilt down, then add a couple of pints of stock, and then just bring that to the boil. I tend to leave the stalks in, okay? You don't have to strip all of the leaves off the stalk, but before you go to put it in the food processor and blitz it up, it's worth removing the stalks because they never seem to blitz very well, and you end up with kind of stringy bits if you leave the stalks in. So you can leave them in for cooking, but then remove them before you blitz. And then simply put all that in a food processor with a dash of cream. Nutmeg goes really nice with it, and a blob of cream cheese. So this nettle soup is one of the easiest things to start with. We also can, of course, make nettle wine, nettle beer. I used to make nettle cordial with, and I've tried that with both fresh and dried nettles. However, I don't make cordials or jams anymore. If you saw the other video, you'll know why. I don't believe in boiling and nuking the life out of living plants. So, other interesting things about nettles is this: people say to me, is it not stinging you? Yes, it stings, but it's just part of life, and it's kind of the whole concept of grasping the nettle. Now, the thing that stings you, okay, you've got 3 acids, well, 3 chemicals in there. There's acetylcholine, there's histamine, and there's formic acid, and it's a mixture of those 3 things that sting you. So, moving up the plant, so we know we can use the roots, you can use the leaves. At the top, if you've ever seen the seeds are kind of little dangly things. Well, you can eat the seeds as a wayside nibble, or you can take them home and dry them and store them. And how you can use the seeds for food, you can use them as you would kind of any seed type on top of bread buns, or to pat on cheese. So you could kind of lightly toast them and pat them on top of cheese. But by far the most interesting fact about nettle seeds is they're actually an adrenal stimulator. And it's long been known to have an effect of kind of vitalising whatever eats them. So there's a story from, it's about the 1700s, and there were unethical horse dealers in Eastern Europe knew this about nettle seeds, its kind of adrenal stimulating properties, and they would feed their horses nettle seeds, which kind of would dangle off the top. They would feed the horses nettle seeds, and they would the horse would get a glossy coat, and it would become kind of really full of energy. And then when the horse went to market, it would sell, but then in a few days' time it would be back to being the nag that it was. Now, about a century later, a German doctor heard this, and he decided he would try it on the old people in the nursing home where he worked. And he took to giving them a spoonful in the morning and a spoonful at night. Now, if you're interested in taking nettle seeds, 1 spoonful of nettle seeds is it's like eating sawdust. It's just dry, you can't swallow them. You couldn't even mix it with juice or water because they just float on the top, just in like an inch thick layer on the top. So the best way to take nettle seeds is to mix them into yogurt or a smoothie where it kind of evenly disperses them. So anyway, he was given his impatiens, these nettle seeds, and he noticed after 3 weeks a noticeable change in their libido, in their appearance. They started taking care of their appearance again, and they started courting in the nursing home. Then nettle seeds went out of fashion. We just didn't. In fact, even in Ray Mears' book, he says that he doesn't recommend eating nettle seeds because he assumed they would burn the mouth, and that was what as recently as a couple of decades ago. So over the last couple of decades, well, I'd say the last maybe 5 years, nettle seeds have actually seen a real comeback. And part of that is because our young people today, when they go to festivals, they're healthy, they want to be able to dance all night, but they're into the kind of vegan burgers and their green smoothies. So they kind of, the idea of nettle seeds has been rediscovered as an adrenal pick-me-up, and they were taking them so they could dance all night and then still feel okay the next day. So there was a lady who came on my Teach Foraging course, and she was a keen runner. And when she heard this about nettle seeds, she decided to take some to her running club, and she had some, and she said she won against a woman who she'd never won against, and she was giving them out at running club, and she noticed a real difference. And one of the reasons they work with the kind of vitalizing is that they contain linoleic acid, so that's kind of one of the oils that help with the omega oil production. So it kind of helps with your joints, and it helps with that kind of glossy hair and skin. So nettle seeds, yeah, not to be overlooked. So we've met thistle, we've met nettle. I'm going to introduce you now to a plant called, we've already met Herb Robert, so this next plant is called Herb Bennett. Okay, so I'll take you around to this shady corner to meet Herb Bennett. Now, Herb Bennett is a plant that's often been associated with Christianity because it contains three petals on the leaves. Where are we? So that's the Holy Trinity, and the flowers have 5 petals, which is 5 sins, I believe. So, Herb Bennett, I'm going to tilt you down there, here. It's a very crispy, lightweight, kind of very dry feeling plant. It's also known as wood avens. Here's another one here, look, if you can see there. And here's the flower. It's also known as wood avens. Now, Herb Bennett, or wood avens, is a bit unusual in that it's so dry and crispy, this leaf. It feels like it's hardly got any weight to it at all, and yet it loves to grow in moist areas. So you'd think it would be a bit more kind of heavyweight than that, but it's very kind of like dry and well, almost like there's nothing to it, which means the best way of processing this plant is to dry fry it, because it just goes with the texture. So you can put this in a frying pan with a tiniest little bit of oil and a little bit of salt, and it crisps up very much like seaweed. So if you want some kind of garden seaweed type textured wild plant, Herb Bennett or wood avens is the one. So not only can you eat the aerial parts of Herb Bennett, the root, I haven't dug any root up for you, but the root of Herb Bennett is one of our native spices, and it contains a substance called eugenol, which is exactly the thing that's in cloves. So Herb Bennett root, traditional use of it was to grate 15 grams of it and mix it into an apple pie base to give just a hint of cloves. But because of eugenol, we can also, and if you're coming along to my natural tooth care session in a couple of weeks, you'll hear how you can also use it in your own toothpaste and teeth care products. So this is Herb Bennett, and you can kind of dry fry the leaves, and it's a noisy bird, and the root contains eugenol, so you can use that in cooking as you would with cloves, just grate it in. It's only a meagre root, you know, only small roots, so but you only need it as a flavouring. So that's herb. We're going to move to a different part of the garden now. We'll leave Herb Bennett there. I'll turn you around so you can see my view instead of seeing me. So up here we're going to meet hogweed, and you might be surprised to hear that, but I feel like I'm on a one-woman campaign to save the reputation of hogweed. She doesn't deserve the bad reputation she's got. We're also going to meet willow herb and hawthorn. Have I still got you with Wi-Fi, with reception? Right. I'm going to turn you back around again. So, this is hogweed. You might have heard of giant hogweed. They are related, kind of big and little sister. Unfortunately, little sister's inherited the reputation of a big sister, but undeservedly so. So, I'm picking this because I know I'm alright with it. Now, hogweed comes out of the ground. A couple of months ago you'd have started to see the first shoots poking up with a few little leaves. You can eat the whole thing as it comes through the ground and just cook it like asparagus. So just put it in a frying pan with a little bit of water and put a lid on and just cook the shoots as they come out of the ground. The reason it's got a bad reputation, and you can actually eat lots of parts of this plant, which we'll get onto, but I just want to get over its bad reputation first, is because you've possibly seen in the media about when people get burns, kind of big blisters from this plant, usually from giant hogweed, but this plant does contain that same chemical. And now, the reason I want to defend her is because all she's doing with this chemical is she's just protecting herself. Plants get attacked at root level all the time, and what this plant does is she pumps out something called funerocoumarins, and basically that's at root level when she's getting attacked by fungus. She pumps this chemical out, and it protects her against fungal attack, basically. So that's what this chemical is in the plant. Now, when we get that the funerocoumarins on us, and then we get in the sunlight, it causes the skin to blister. Now there's a couple of things here. Again, it depends on soil type. It depends on how much of that hazard is in the soil for the plant as to how much of that chemical it pumps out. Also, in warmer weather, so more down south, the attacks are worse because it's just warmer, so they have more fungal attack there. So there's a few variables. It's not as simple as picking hogweed will give you blisters. You see the size of this. So giant hogweed would have a dinner-sized plate, and it does have much more of that chemical in it. So all she's doing is trying to protect herself. So, however, having said that, if it's the first time that you're picking hogweed, you should still be careful just in case. So people would say wear gloves, okay, or at least don't kind of be exposed to the sun after you've picked it. So you can eat the shoots as they come through the ground. The next part of it that you can eat is, let's see if I've got a slightly better example. Just as the leaf buds are unfurling, you see these leaves here? Before these were this big, they were packed tightly into like a little purse. I liken it to the mermaid's purses that you find on the beach. So these leaves were once all packed tightly inside that leaf bud there. So it's kind of like a little pouch of green, and sometimes they can be quite substantial, like this big. And that contains unfurled green leaves. As the plant grows taller, we have more of the same little pouches, but this time they contain curled up, ready to expand flowers. So I liken it to a little pouch of broccoli and a little pouch of cauliflower at the top, okay? So we come along, there's one here I'm going to get for you. Oh, it's empty as well. There. So when we come along, you can take these, usually a bit bigger, pull off the top, pull off the bottom, and inside these little pouches, it's just full of either curled up leaves or curled up flowers. And one delicious way to have these is you want about 3 or 4 big ones per person, and you just put them in a frying pan and you put the lid on, so you're cooking them from the inside, so the heat gets right to the centre. Then this casing ends up going translucent. And when it's gone translucent, I'd take the lid off and then crisp them. So you would kind of put a little bit of butter and some salt and pepper, and then you kind of crisp the outside pouch. And they're absolutely delicious. They've got kind of a sweetish, spicy taste. So fried hogweed buds are delicious. You can eat the shoots as they come out of the ground. But as we get to the top, you get these flowers. Now, we don't really use the flowers. They've got quite a nice smell, but when these flowers die back, these are going to become seeds, and the seeds will be about 5mm green discs with a slight dent in the top and kind of ribs down them. So the seeds of hogweed, as a wayside nibble, you can just pick them off the plant and bite one. One seed is like a taste explosion. It tastes of like washing up liquid and orange peel. But how you can use these, it's another one of our native spices, so like clove root. How you can use that is you let them dry out. You can just let them dry out on the plant, or you can take the green ones home and dry them out, and then you would grind them up and use them as a spice for things like milky puddings, chocolate mousses, or savoury things. So you've got the spice from the seeds, you've got these delicious leaf and flower buds, and you've got the new shoots as they come out of the ground. Now, hogweed is one to work up to. I wouldn't start with one of your 5. If you watch the first video, I say just choose 5 plants this year. Don't start with hogweed. It is a member of a family that's potentially very, very dangerous. I just wanted to get it in there that not all plants with bad reputations are unusable, but it's one to work up to because it is obviously, it looks very similar to other plants that are not edible and in fact dangerous. One of the ways you can tell the difference though is it's very hairy stalk and ribbed. This here is very hairy and ribbed. It's not smooth, it's not mottled. So, hogweed, much maligned. So the other thing I want to talk to you about is hawthorn. Now here I've got hawthorn hedge, but you're probably aware that hawthorn can be a tree, and this is just cut into a hedge because it makes really good stock-proof hedging. If you see, you can see it's got very sharp spikes on it. Got really sharp spikes that livestock don't like to push through. So it's often, they are trees, but they're just cut back into hedges. Now hawthorn's a really good one for foragers because it gives us something throughout the year. At the very start of the year, kind of late spring, so April time, the hedge or the tree is bare, but then you just start to get tiny little leaf buds on the end of the branches here. And those little green leaf buds, they're suitable for a wayside nibble. As those unfold into leaves, they're kind of fresh, very vivid green leaves. You can eat those raw in salads. One recipe actually for the new leaves and the leaf buds is to roll some suet pastry, press the leaf buds in and the young leaves in, and then add some chopped meat, roll it up and steam it. So like a savoury suet Swiss roll. So as the leaves grow older, these are past eating raw now. They're just too tough and fibrous. But you can cook it like a green vegetable, so just like you would cook cabbage. After the leaves have come out, I don't know if we've got any now still. Blossom, there we go. You might notice that this is pink hawthorn blossom. Can you see? Most hawthorn blossom that you see will be white, or it can be anywhere between white, pale pink, or that very bright pink. This is a Midland variety, so it's quite unusual up here, but usually it's kind of a creamy white. Now the blossom tends to come out around about May. In fact, it's often known as, have you heard of the darling buds of May? It used to be used for May crowns, for spring processions. So it's been long associated with spring, has hawthorn blossom. We can eat it as a wayside nibble. If you try it, you'll notice it's got a slight bitter almondy taste. So one of the messages I want to convey about taste in wild food, we've mentioned about how some things that defend themselves with prickles and spikes, they can be quite mild in taste. They don't need to have an overpowering taste to put things off. And we've mentioned about habitat and weather affecting taste. So the other thing is, there's certain tastes that mean something on the chemical level. So if you find something tastes of a bitter almond, with wild food, that's usually a substance called amygdalin. If you've ever eaten apple seeds and noticed that it's got a bit of a bitter almond taste, so these flowers can sometimes have a little bit of a bitter almond taste, as can the flowers from blackthorn, you know, the slowberry tree, their flowers can have that bitter almond taste. So bitter almond usually means it's got this substance in called amygdalin that if you eat too much of it, the body can convert it to hydrogen cyanide, which results in respiratory distress and convulsions. However, you're not likely to eat that many kind of tree blossoms to have that much. So, and then other taste, things like lemony taste usually mean it's an oxalic acid, and yeah, so often let's start getting used to what the tastes mean in the way of the phytochemicals that you're consuming. So you can eat the blossoms as a wayside nibble with that caveat in mind. They're very nice just scattered in salads, or if you were decorating cakes. You can eat the leaves, but the most interesting thing about these by far, we haven't got any that are going to berry yet, but after these flowers have gone, you've got a tiny little green berry in the middle. I don't know if you can see the hawthorn there. Now the berry is, when it's big and rusty red, kind of usually about September time, you can just eat the berry as a wayside nibble. The berries are very large stones though, so it's quite surprising that you bite into it and instantly you hit this big stone, and then you've got to spit it out, and it just leaves a little bit of flesh on the outside of a large stone. However, that flesh is quite an intriguing experience because it's very dry, very mealy, and actually quite substantial. A lot of people liken the texture to avocado. It's bland and it's kind of got that mealy, thick texture. So how our ancestors would have processed these berries, and you can't really bake with them because they've got the stones in. How our ancestors would have baked with would have processed hawthorn berries. They would have made fruit leathers, and also, have you heard of pemmican? So I'm going to put you down there. Sorry, that's it. So to make fruit leathers, you take your hawthorn berries, smash them up with a couple of rocks, take out the seeds, and then spread the resulting pulp on a flat rock, and then you would just leave it in the embers of a fire to dry out. And then our ancestors would have rolled those up, put them in the little leather pouches like the ones that Paul Dore showed you to make last week, and that would have been a way of conserving the vitamin C harvest for over winter. Other things they would have done is to make pemmican. Native American Indians used to make pemmican with dried deer meat. So meat from deer that was dried so much that and then when it was pulverized it became a powder, and they would mush up the hawthorn berries and mix them both together in some deer fat. And pemmican can actually last about 20 years. So it's a really good way of kind of keeping the vitamin C and the fat over winter. So pemmican, so they're traditional ways of using the hawthorn berries. Also, you might have heard of people talk about bread and cheese, where they'd have taken one of the leaves, wrapped a berry and eaten it as if it was a sandwich. That's a wartime thing, the idea of, you know, when they couldn't have bread and cheese and make it up from what they found in the hedgerow. So more modern ways of using the hawthorn berries, you might see on some shelves hawthorn ketchup. So if you're too posh for tomato ketchup, you can make hawthorn ketchup. Basically, it's kind of warming the berries in vinegar and spices and kind of blitzing it together. Other things you can do with the berries, I've infused them in whiskey. So if I've had a party and, you know, in anticipation, I've put a few hawthorn berries into bottles of whiskey or brandy with a couple of spices, maybe a couple of hogweed seeds, or a little bit of you could do it with woodhaven's root, so a kind of spiced berry brandy. You can also, of course, we're all into these superfood powders now that people buy in bags from Holland and Barrett, so you can make your own. We've said about how you can make it with green leaves, and you can of course do it with foraged berries. So if you were just to take your hawthorn berries or other berries, dry them, powder them, remove the stones, and then you just keep that powder in a jar, and you can add it to whatever you want. You could add it to baking, you could add it to smoothies. So again, it's a way of making that vitamin C last and storing it. So yeah, you just dry the berries on a baking tray, pull out the stones, grind it into a powder, re-dry the powder, because if you don't re-dry powders, things always go mouldy, and then just store it in a jar and just add it to lots of other things. So it's a really good one because it's hawthorn. It gives foragers something throughout the year, right from April time, like we said about the little spring buds, via the leaves, via the buds via the berries. But then the other thing is, you might have seen those berries stay on the trees till about December sometimes. And people used to say, oh, it's going to be a cold winter because the hawthorn tree's got loads of berries on it. And I used to think, oh, really clever tree, how does it know what the weather's going to be like? And it's nothing to do with that, why they stay on the tree over winter, more so some years than others. It's because the migratory birds know what the weather's like and they leave earlier, so leaving more berries on the trees behind. So those berries that you see left on the hedge or the tree, you'll see that come kind of December, they're a bit shriveled, but and you might think you can't use them, and a lot of people assume that they're past it. However, I tell them you can eat the hawthorn berry off the tree right up until December, January, whenever you see it, because it's simply solar dehydrated. It's just solar and wind dehydrated. It's the same as if you took it home and put it in your oven. So please don't think that you can't eat hawthorn berries off the tree when they're kind of shriveled up. All right, and it's the same with rose hips as well. You can still get rose hips when they're dried up. So hogweed, I'm going to save a reputation. Hawthorn, a good one for throughout the year. There's one more plant I wanted to show you here, and that is, can you see this patch here? If you learn to read the landscape by doing permaculture, you'll notice something about this patch of plants. We've got 3 plants that are indicator plants that tell you a little bit about this land. You've got the rush, you've got the creeping buttercup, and over there you've got willow herb. We're going to go and get some of this now, show you. So this all tells you that this area used to empty. So here is willow herb. Hang on. Now this plant here, this is called willow herb. You find it in damp areas, like you do with willow actually, but this plant isn't related to willow at all. It's just called willow herb because it has these leaves that look very much like the willow tree leaves. And there's the root. Very easy to pull out. They're very shallow rooting, so when you pull them out you can just get a root like that very, very easily. Now there's a couple of types of willow herb. Here all around the site on this 2 acres it's absolutely full of greater willow herb, which some people call hairy willow herb because it's got a bit of a hairy stem. The other type that you might see is rosebay willow herb. They look exactly the same pretty much all the way up, but at the top the flowers are a bit different. Greater willow herb flowers, they're kind of just more on their own and it doesn't have a pointy top, whereas rosebay willow herb, they have this almost like a spire of pink flowers at the top. Now willow herb also has another name, that's fireweed, and the reason it gets that name is because it's a good colonizer plant. If ever there's been an area of destruction in the city, say like after the war and bombing, this was one of the first plants to grow. It loves areas that have been had fires. It also grows near old-fashioned railway lines where they've tipped the coal out. So it's a colonizing plant, and you know, it's a pioneer plant in that it's one of the first to grow in areas like that. But there's another reason it's called fireweed, and that's because the flowers, after they've passed, they have the seed heads, so kind of tall seed pods that pop open and have a lot of fluff. So you can actually set fire with that. That's a flash tinder. The thing about thistle as well, we didn't mention that when the seeds of the thistle also kind of mature, they get the fluffy thistle seed heads. That's another flash tinder. So really good materials for lighting fires. So what can you eat on a willow herb? You can actually eat all of it. So it doesn't, like I say, it doesn't matter if it's greater willow herb or rosebay willow herb. You can eat the root. You can eat this stem here. You can even eat the leaves, but these are quite bitter. But by far the best part of this plant, we just take all the leaves off. Remember how we did with thistle? So most edible plants have this phenomena going on, and that's that the inner stem, you could just cook this stem, but the outside is usually tough and fibrous. So we're just going to cut inside. And this has loads of carbohydrate inside it, if you can see all of that there. So if you peel the outer off, the inner pith is very carb dense. and it's much less bitter than the leaves. The leaves are really quite bitter. The outer bit is bitter, but the inner, that bit, that's delicious, and it's not too chewy or fibrous either. So the other thing you can do with willow herb is the beautiful little purple pinky flowers at the top that come out in summer. Some people pick those and they make like a syrup with them. So you just would mix them with sugar and water and heat it up and strain the flowers out, and it actually leaves the syrup a lovely bright pink colour. And you can then pour that on desserts or into cocktails or whatever you want. Again, it's no longer my thing. I don't boil anything to death and add white sugar anymore. But if syrups and cordials are your thing, you can actually make syrups, cordials, alcoholic drinks with the flowers of willow herb. So I need to show you goosegrass, which I had to cut short because we lost you, so I need to go back and find that, and also some plantain. Right, turn it round so you can see. Right, back again. I'm just going to grab it. Right, thank you for bearing with me there. So this plant here, this is plantain, plantago. This one's plantago lancelot because it has a longer leaf and a small seed head. And then this one here, this big one, you see similar leaf structure but much wider. This is plantago major. So where's the seed head gone? So plantain is another good one for foragers because our ancestors would have been absolutely starving after winter. They would have, after the hungry gap, so come kind of February, they would have pounced on anything that was green that was coming through the soil. And this was one of the early plants to poke through the soil in about February time, along with nettle, goosegrass, which we are going to look at. So anything that was an early green, they would have pounced on. Even if it didn't taste very nice, they would have found a way to make it edible. And that's exactly what plantain is like. It doesn't taste that nice, so you have to double boil it because it is so bitter. It's very, very bitter, plantain. I once tried to put it to with some couscous, and yeah, it was so bitter we couldn't eat it. So what I mean by double boiling to reduce that bitterness is you bring it to boil in one pan of salty water, you discard that pan of water, the water, and then you reboil it in a fresh pan of water. Then you can process the greens. And one traditional recipe was after you've double boiled it to leach the bitterness out, you would then mix it with some meat and a creamy sauce, so like chopped gammon, some of the double boiled plantain and a creamy sauce. So that was a traditional recipe. So the leaves themselves for food, they've limited use, however it's good survival food. By far, so the reason I'm showing you this plant is not for the leaves at all, it's actually for the seeds. Now, although this type of plantain only has a very small seed head, this type of plantain, a bit later in the season, will have a huge seed head. It will be like, sometimes they can be almost a foot tall, and it's all full of seeds. So it's like this one, but all the way down. Now, I'm going to show you these seeds now. Who likes sesame seeds? Because I like to think of these as our native sesame seeds. So you don't need to import sesame seeds, you just can go around and collect lots of plantain seeds. So this is this plant's saving grace when it comes to food. It's got loads going for it when it comes to medicine, but as food goes, the seeds are what make it worth harvesting. So you just come along with a plastic bag and you get as many seed heads as you can, and you can winnow them. So if you see here, you see they're green. In fact, the wind's winnowing it for me, look. So you just rub the seeds until you loosen the skin around them, and then hold your palm up to the wind, gentle breeze. There's loads more seeds in here, I've just got a few out for you. Oh, there it's blowing the wind. that it's blowing the seeds. But you just let the husks blow away, and then the rest of the seeds, you just toss them in a frying pan. You don't need any oil because these seeds are very, very oil rich. In fact, I believe that when they're pressed, they're something like 80%, so they've got a really high oil yield. So there's a tiny little seed. You can just eat them on like that. You can eat them with the husks on, by the way. You don't have to winnow them at all. You can leave those husks on and still eat them. I've got a funny story about these seeds. I've spent ages collecting some. I'd collect a full jam jar and I'd toasted them. I'd put them in this jam jar with a bit of sea salt, and I left them there, and I came in one day and it was empty with just a spoon in next to the sofa. And I said to my son Noah, I said, "Where are all the plantain seeds?" And he said, "Oh," he said, "I've eaten them all." And he had just eaten an entire jar of plantain seeds. But the funny thing is, these seeds have an incredible side effect, and that's that they slough your intestines out. And they're full of mucilage, which coats the intestines after they've sloughed them. So I said, "Oh, that's fine, son." I said, "You'll have nice clean intestines anyway." So he never did that again. But so the seeds are absolutely delicious, toasted with a little bit of salt. The leaves, not so good, but a decent survival food. Now, medicinally, this plant is outstanding. The leaves are known as our wilderness plaster, because inside these leaves it's rich in vitamin K, which is the blood clotting vitamin, and also allantoin, which soothes sore skin. So if you're out walking and you get blisters or you've got a wound, if you just break open this plant, you can even chew it to break open the cells and release those chemicals, and then rub it onto the wound. Or if it's you need a plaster, you can just get a smaller leaf and stick that inside your shoe, in between the sock and the foot, so that as your foot rubs, it's kind of self-healing. So it's got allantoin and vitamin K for healing wounds and soothing bites and stings. In fact, this really is the go-to if you're stung with a nettle. So you could rub that on as a wilderness first aid. But the other medicinal factor about this plant is it's really, really good for supporting respiratory function. So if anybody's been in Holland and Barrett and seen a tincture, Plantago tincture, said to be taken for helping with respiratory disorders such as bronchitis or pneumonia or asthma, just to kind of strengthen the lungs. And Plantago tincture is just this, so you don't need to buy it, you can make your own, because plantain grows everywhere. It's particularly, you will find it in urban areas because it's a plant that likes to be walked on. And the reason it likes to be walked on is because these seed heads, I'll put it down now, oh there we go, these seed heads, how they spread, how this plant reproduces is these seeds need to get stuck in your feet or animal paws. So this plant has evolved to grow on paths and places that people will walk over it in order to spread. So you'll find this all over urban areas as well, and it really likes compacted soil for that reason. In fact, we took it to America where they called it white man's foot over there, because it just spread wherever we went. So it's good for respiratory fortifying. Plantago tincture. So you don't need to go to Holland and Barrett, you can make your own simply by harvesting it and chopping it up, mixing it in some vodka, and just leaving it to the vodka. It will extract the plant goodness, and then you just take like however much you're meant to take, whatever dosage you're meant to take of the tincture. Alcohol is always the strongest extraction of plant material over and above oil or glycerites, so you can actually make your own Plantago tincture, so you don't need to go to Holland and Barrett. So by far the best use of this plant is the seeds and then the medicinal aspects. By all means give the leaves a go. We've got one more plant up here to show you, and this is a really interesting one because again carbs is difficult to find with wild food. So this plant down here is actually what we used to cultivate before we had potatoes. Hang on a minute, can you see the silvery plant? There. This plant is called silverweed. It's a low growing plant and it actually has silvery light leaves. You see how silvery this one is? This is really, really good example of silverweed. Now this is mind-blowing, this plant, because before we had potatoes in our country, we didn't have that many carbohydrates, so we had to kind of make do with what we could in the wild. And this plant has 30%, I think it's 33% actually, starch in its root. So the root of this plant, we actually cultivated this plant in patches, and we bred it so that it was a bit bigger and substantial. I've actually dug you a root out so you can see, and you'll be surprised, it's like got a little potato on the end. So 1 minute, oops, there we go. I've had a little nibble, which is that white bit there. Now that, can you see that like mini potato if you like? That's the root of silverweed. Again, you can find silverweed in the cities. It's another one that's happy to grow on compacted land. People do say you can use the leaves, but I've heard varying things about that. But they have a yellow flower when they do flower. But this is what you're after. Now the root can be eaten raw. However, people say that if you eat too much of the root raw, it can cause a little bit of tummy wind. So they say actually how you would do it is throw all of these into the embers of a fire and roast them. Or another way is to boil them up. You don't really need to peel them. You can see there's not much skin on them. Let's look how lovely that is inside. So boil them up and then mash them, and it tastes like hazelnut after, and kind of a mashed potato with a slight nutty aftertaste. So silverweed root. I'm going to try and tilt the camera again without it going mad. There, I can't see for the comments, but hopefully you can see silverweed in the ground. These aren't the yellow flowers of silverweed, these are of the buttercup, but the silverweed flowers are very similar. So yes, so starch, native form of wild carbohydrate. Right, let's go back and see if we can find some goosegrass. I have seen some here. There we go. Right, this was the one I wanted to show you when the camera went off. You're probably all familiar with this, and lots of people have different names for it. It's can you see? Sticky weed, goosegrass, cleavers. It's the stuff that grows up sides of hedges and clings to fences in urban areas. It starts very small, about a couple of inches out the ground. Again, it's an early one, so February time you'll see it coming out the ground about two inches. Gallium aperine is its Latin name, and where it gets all of these names from is gallium aperine. Apero means to cling. Cleavers means to stick to things. Sticky weed. So it's all to do with its kind of ability to stick to your clothing. However, we'll look a bit more about why it gets those stick names, because it also kind of does things inside the body with that kind of phenomena. It adheres to toxins. So, but the other name that we'd mentioned was goosegrass. Now, I had a neighbour up in the moors who had geese, and one day we were gardening and I said, let's give the geese some goosegrass, and they went absolutely mad for it. So it's not a name that's been given for nothing. Geese absolutely love goosegrass, and we realised it's probably because these little hairs, they like it to clean their throats out. So it's another use for it. You can use it to fatten your goose and then eat your goose if you wanted to. Now, gallium aperine, or goosegrass sticky weed, so it starts this big and you can eat it raw. Just cut it and eat it like as a cod parcel, like a present, using that kind of like wrapping that around it to seal it, so it looked like a little parcel, and then steam all of it, and then this is steamed, and you can eat this along with the fish. And another use for the plant as it's growing is just as you can kind of steam fry it, eat it as a vegetable, but only up until it gets these little, the little sticky balls that stick on your jumper and your dog's fur. Once it gets to the seed stage, it's very difficult to eat the plant. Right, moved a bit further. So When it gets those little sticky balls, the good news is, even though you can't use the plant because it's just too tough and fibrous, you can use those little seeds. And the interesting thing is, this plant is a member of the coffee family. It actually contains caffeine. So those tiny little seeds, you can use them as you would use any seeds, but by far the best use is to put them on a baking tray, roast them, grind them, re-roast the powder and use it as a caffeinated coffee. So, because they're so small, it takes quite a lot to make coffee. So you might want to use some of the other things that you can use for a coffee, like dandelion roots or acorns, and just kind of add these ground seeds of this to it for a little bit of a caffeine kick. Otherwise it's quite a laborious job making much coffee with it. And it's a kind of coffee, like we said, with the acorns, or with dandelion root. It's the kind of coffee you would need a cafetiere. It's not, it won't dissolve. So yeah, so the good news is that the seeds are edible as well. Now, after you've used the seeds, I have made herb teas with this, thinking, right, it's too tough to cook now, I'll just make a herb tea with it. So you can do that after this plant has become too tough and fibrous. However, it just tasted like dishwater, to be honest, but it is worth persevering with, and we'll look at that in a minute. So the plant ultimately, from being that kind of big in February, the plant ultimately can get to 4 or 5 feet tall, and you might see it even from July onwards. It goes a straw colour as it dies back. It loses its green and it goes a straw colour. At that point, there's nothing really we can do food-wise with it, but the good news is, at that point, it becomes a really useful fire starter. So, you know how we mentioned with fireweed and with thistledown, they're flash tinders, so you just put a spark to them and they go whoosh. Dried goosegrass or cleavers, when it's kind of tall and strawy, if you put that in a bundle, that's what you call your tinder extender. So you would have your flash tinder, and then you would have this as your tinder extender, which passes the fire from the flash tinder that goes out really quickly, passes it to the next stage of the fire, if you like. So useful as a fire starter. It's also really good if you've got children to make fairy crowns. On a walk, I always make a ring of this and then put it on the head of a child that's with us. So this is goosegrass, cleavers, galliomaparine. As we mentioned at the beginning, all of those words mean it clings to things. So it can also do that within the body, which is why I mentioned about it's worth persevering with the herb tea that tastes of dishwater, because when you take this internally as a tea or as a food or as a tincture, it has a habit of drawing toxins out of the lymph system. So say you've had a protracted illness, like glandular fever or something, and you're struggling to get over it, or you run down and you're just picking up one thing after the other. By consuming this as a tea or a tincture, it will pull out the toxins from your body and then carry them away. And it can also do that topically. So if you had a bite or a boil and you had no other medicine, you were out in the wild, if you chew this up and put it on your bite or your boil, or you could even try and find some clay and you mix this with the clay, then it acts to draw out the toxin topically as well. And then finally, it's a really good pot scrub for washing up your food after your wild food meal. If you haven't brought a scourer, then a handful of that will do. So I think we've covered all of them. We've met goosegrass, hogweed, hawthorn, willow herb, plantain. Oh, the teepee site. Yeah, the teepees have been taken down, waiting for some new ones. We've met, yeah, willow herb, hawthorn, hogweed. What down here? Oh, I've got one more to show you. Jack by the hedge. If you're still, yeah, all right, I think. If you don't have to go, I've got one more plant to show you, and that's Jack by the hedge. Sorry, because I ended up losing you for a little bit, haven't I? I've ended up adding on. Right, so very quickly then, this here is Jack by the hedge. The overwintering rosette is more kind of club-like leaves. Jack by the hedge, as the name suggests, grows next to hedges. It's also called garlic mustard. And if anybody doesn't like wild garlic because they find it's too strong, this is a really good alternative, because these leaves, if you eat them, in fact, even if you just crumble them and smell it, you can really smell a strong kind of, but not as strong as wild garlic, garlicky taste. However, it does have quite a bitter aftertaste. Now these leaves, you would normally chop them up and mix them with a potato salad or pasta. Any way you would normally use wild garlic, really, you can use these leaves. They're very fragile, so they wilt very quickly with cooking, so you literally just add them at the end or have them raw. But by far the best part of this is, and I did dig one out for you, the root, oh, there it is, right. The root of Jack by the Hedge or garlic mustard, can you see? This is the strongest part of the plant, and it doesn't have that same bitter aftertaste that the leaves have. So the root is delicious. It's very much like horseradish, actually, if you like horseradish. So the root of garlic mustard, doesn't have that bitter taste. So you can grate this into burgers if you're making homemade burgers. Grate the root into it, and then put your green layer of the leaves. And you can even, at the top bit here, can you see this? These are going to become mustard seed pods. And inside these, when they go brown, at the back end of summer, they'll split open and there'll be tiny seeds in there. And you can get those seeds out and you can just pulverise them with your pestle and mortar, mix them with some mayonnaise, and then have that on your burger as well. So you can have a whole burger meal, a jack burger, I would call it. So burger with a grated root in, the green layer of the Jack by the Hedge leaves, and then the seeds in the mayonnaise, and then you can even top the bread bun with the seeds as well. So, sorry, I'm aware that we've run over, and I'm sorry about tech problems. So if you've got any questions, okay, just put them in the comments below and I'll answer them, all right? So thank you for bearing with me out here. All right, thank you. I'm going to go now. You all okay?